about Barry Bonds, now we have a very sophisticated history, a very sophisticated set of attributions about what kind of baseball player he was. And the red bits there, if you can just barely pick those out, that's where he led the league. So now you have this new thing called comparative analytics. Verizon's got 900 good, confident set of analytics for folks to compare against that we have released and will continue to work on in releasing. And in a framework that you can take and apply at home, absolutely free. There's a wiki, go use it, knock yourself out, we don't care, right? So if we have the ability to try and say, here's a notion of what kind of good baseball player Barry Bonds may or may not be, how can we do that for these? And my assertion is this: deconstruct it. I borrowed the concept of a balanced scorecard. I was inspired again by Andrew Jaquith and his book on security metrics. But I don't think the balanced scorecard that we should be applying, at least initially, to understand whether or not we're doing a great job at managing risk and defending against threats, really is what you find in a regular balanced scorecard. I think what we simply do is deconstruct that Venn diagram and that risk model. We have 4 separate pieces. We have to understand what we're doing, the change in those, the variation from past and present, comparative analytics, which is why Verizon's saying, here the stuff is free, right? And move forward, right? So a couple of interesting things happen if you take this approach, I believe. First off, capability measurements kind of destroys governance, right? We don't really care. We can see what effective patterns, what effective processes and procedures are by doing correlations against established patterns. Compliance really simply becomes a factor of the impact of the impact landscape, unless you're really concerned about how a specific compliance program can help you defend and its effectiveness in defense in your comparison against other folks. So the assertion here is that the post-GRC world will be ushered in by a couple of factors. First, data. Data applied by technology, like a data warehouse, things that actually spawn operational instances that help defend the enterprise. Very pragmatic. Second, reporting becomes something that we do by measuring a lot of things and using multiple models, not just one GRC suite that runs us through a discovery exercise over and over and over and over again. Third, data sharing and comparative analytics are critical. Why? If you take that baseball card example, if you just give me the stats on any one of those players, I don't know what that makes, if he's good, if he's bad, or what have you, until I can compare him against a significant sample of his peers. And then I can say, well, this guy's better than this guy, he's better than these 5 guys, he's the 7th best guy out of these 10, and so forth. And that's what we believe the future of GRC is. It's basically deconstructed, destroyed, and made operationally significant through these models. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the Veris, this isn't a trick and this wasn't planned in advance, as he was talking, I thought about it. So the Veris framework, I get that it's pretty freaking cool. You could profile an organization based on some identifiers about it, and sort of determine its expected performance based on comparing it to a peer group, right? But how then...
I'm not sure I get that far. But
okay, well, go back to the... Can we go back to the slides? So it looked like you're essentially collecting attributes on different organizations and their performance based on incidents they'd experienced, which is essentially how you would have controls for different types of risk manifestations. And you can then sort of determine, a different company that you don't have data on yet, but that has certain attributes. You might expect it to perform, how it might perform relative to a peer group, which you've then, shown what the performance of the peer group is. That's useful for you as the new organization. You say, okay, compared to other organizations in my fighting weight, I can expect this kind of knockout, I can expect to last this many rounds in the fight. So that's great, and that helps you maybe quantify your exposure, but then how does that, do you have information in there that would help an organization figure out where they need to focus in order to improve their defenses? Do you have the sort of proactive information as well as the incident information?
Well, because each of these represents a failure, okay, they actually, I would think, would be real, right? So, in fact, in terms of actual performance metrics, anybody in an organization that does penetration testing or gets their systems tested regularly? Handful of folks? Okay. I'll ask, what's the benefit for you of a penetration test?
Scaring management?
Well, no, I mean, really, you get a report back. What does that mean to you? Go ahead. It's a USUCometer. How now? I used to work with a pen test team, and we used to express things in sort of, well, there's only so much we can do in a month, right? And we usually scope out by month. Do you want us to go wide or deep? And how do you measure? How do you balance that depth versus width? And if it takes me a couple weeks to break in, right, and actually get to my goal, right, I've only proven one entryway into your organization, right? So here's what I've always thought of, and getting back to answering your question. One of the things, and I don't have the steps here, but one of the things that I would assert is, if you did and this is one of the things I hope to do with Verizon, is if you perform a penetration test, right? I can model that. I can take the Verus object model, the attack model, and I can say, well, first the pen team did this, then they did that, then they did this, then they did, and they got a goal. Now I've got 900 cases. Hopefully that's going to grow exponentially over the next couple of years, that I can say, oh, you know what? Your pen test was exactly like these 15 incidents. Those 15 incidents cost this much money. Now you have a much more informative pen test versus, okay, go patch these things and hope that the vendor doesn't get screwed next month and have another vulnerability and we're just going to patch it over again. Honestly, I'll tell you what, after 5 years of working with a pen test team, it really became find the blank SA password. And this was 2000 to 2005. Things are a little different, but it really was just this fairly repetitive exercise. And what I really think is that we should do lightweight, very focused pen tests based on the patterns that we're most concerned of, the patterns that show up the most, the patterns that directly relate to specific impacts that we're concerned again. And then when you think about prevent, detect, and respond, right, and our ability to do that, I think in terms of feeding operational metrics back into what we can expect in terms of performance into a business intelligence platform, we can take a look at the metrics that we describe out of discovery and mitigation if we truly do red team. I'm now not a believer at all in blue team exercises, by the way, for this reason. But I can get performance metrics. Man, I can see if I'm hitting the home runs. I can see if my batting average is good, especially if now I've got 1,000 other penetration test results from different organizations, maybe similar, maybe not so similar, and I can benchmark myself against that. So that's a long way to answer your question, but I really do believe that and I'm not Verus, right? You guys can build models yourself. It's really, something that is kind of enjoyable once you get into it. But you can certainly do this. You just have to understand that comparative analytics is key. And to some extent, the ISACs are trying to do this, right? Anybody familiar with the ISACs? Yes? No? They're just groups of security folks who get together and talk at a high level. But the ISACs are trying to do this, and there are plenty of groups that are trying to do that. So anyway, did I answer your question in that rambling? Sorry.
Yeah, no, you did. It basically you would take the results and then you can sort of tailor your defense plan to what didn't work for others. Or I mean, you can emphasize the threats that manifested for other organizations similar to yours. It helps you prioritize your plans.
Sure, and we might say that we know that the numbering breaks down here, but we might say 1, 2, and 3 we know that we're concerned about, right? We're susceptible to. Maybe that's what came out in the penetration test or what have you. Or maybe that's what we're seeing now as a result of sucking in all of this information into a data warehouse, right? Well, if we know that we can see that pattern 1, 2, and 3, and then we have a 4th event that typically happens, well, now we should go say, now we can have, if you remember me saying so, some analysts jump up out of the cube and run down to the SOC going, watch out, right? Out of 10,000 different instances, I ran 100,000 simulations in 0.2 of a second, and by golly, 40% of the time we saw number 4 come up, and we've got a number 4, and that means bad. Yes, sir. Yeah, and really what you're talking about is kind of data obsolescence. And there's certainly plenty of, social sciences has plenty to teach us in that regard about how you might apply that. It's not perfect. Again, all of these models are just hypotheses, and they always are constantly getting falsified. Ours should be as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so models regularly degrade. That's absolutely true. It's part of why it's important to continue to have feedback loops to keep you understanding what your performance is, and then you go back and you retrain your models based on fresher data. I mean, it doesn't stop. It's kind of like virus software. You have to keep updating it because new signatures come out. You need new signature files or whatever heuristics your virus scanning engine is using. Yep. You can retire old data. You can retire old cases, or you can actually factor that into the equations that come out of the modeling exercise. If you've actually got like a real statistical model, you can actually decay the variables associated with older data, so that it has less weight associated with that. That's a pretty common technique to have sort of decay variables. And then it just decays out of your sample set. Absolutely. That's why modeling is an iterative exercise, so that you can always figure out, these variables are decaying faster than those variables, so they need to be retired out faster.
Well, it can be complex. It may be simpler. We just don't know yet than we think. I was trying to get it up on the screen, but in this year's data breach report on page 21, we're showing, it shows basically the various threat actions, and they're at a high level. They're malware, they're hacking, there's social, there's misuse, there's physical, there's error and environmental. And it shows their changes over time. And one of the cool things over the last 2 years is we've seen this huge spike in malware, just ginormous. And so what you have to do is you have to see that trend and make a decision. We've got something happening over time. Does this mean that 2005 models of attacks are informative or not? Maybe they still are. The other thing that's interesting is